Some promises are written in ink. Others are forged in fire. 15 years ago, a lone cowboy made a choice that changed a young girl's life forever. He saved her from a fate worse than death and never looked back. He thought the story was over. But destiny had other plans. Now, a woman returns to a forgotten town with a secret that will force him to confront the past he thought he had left behind. Get ready to witness a tale of sacrifice, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between two souls. The wind on the high plains of Wyoming was a constant companion to John Jace Riley, a man who had chosen a life of solitude over the messy entanglements of the world. He was a veteran of a different kind of war, a quiet battle against the land itself, and his only companions were the rustle of the sagebrush and the distant call of a hawk. He lived in a small cabin, his days a simple rhythm of tending to his cattle and mending fences. He was a man who needed nothing and asked for less. This self-contained world was shattered one sweltering afternoon when he found her. She was a girl no older than 10, huddled behind a rock formation, her clothes torn and her eyes wide with a fear that went beyond a simple child's fright. He learned her name was Lena, a name that would echo in his mind for years to come. She was a runaway, a child on the run from a brutal family who wanted to sell her into a life of servitude to pay off their gambling debts. Jace, a man known for his hard exterior, felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a protective instinct he thought had long since died. The problem was immense and immediate. He couldn't just leave her there. The town, a desolate place called Black Creek, was filled with men who would see her as an opportunity, a commodity. But taking her with him was an invitation for trouble, a disruption of the solitary life he had so carefully built. The family, a notorious group of drifters known as the O'Connells, would come looking for her. They were ruthless and dangerous, a threat he was not equipped to handle alone. He made a decision that would forever change the course of his life. He took her in. For a few weeks, his cabin, once a place of quiet solitude, was filled with the sounds of a child. He taught her how to ride, how to shoot, and how to survive. But he knew this was a temporary solution. He couldn't keep her, not with the O'Connells on the hunt. The central conflict was not just physical, but also moral. He had to save her, but at what cost to himself? He knew his only option was to get her as far away as possible, to a place where she would be safe. He sold a prized horse, gathered what little money he had, and arranged for her to travel to a distant orphanage in the east, a place where she would have a chance at a new life. He watched her go, a small, fragile figure disappearing into the horizon, and he felt a strange mix of relief and a quiet, profound emptiness. He thought he had done the right thing, that the story was over. But it was only just beginning. 15 years passed, and Jace's life returned to its familiar rhythm. The years had hardened his face, etched new lines around his eyes, and silvered his hair. He lived with the memory of Lena, a ghost of a girl he had saved, but he had long since convinced himself that he had done his part. He was a man of the present, with no past and no future. His peace was shattered by the arrival of a stranger in Black Creek. She was a woman, no longer a girl, with a quiet strength that was both intimidating and captivating. She had the eyes of the young girl he had once known, but her presence was that of a woman who had seen the world and carried herself with a sense of purpose. Her name was Lena, a name that was close enough to Lena to send a jolt of recognition through him. She was an accomplished architect, a woman who had come back to her hometown to oversee a new railroad project, a symbol of progress and a harbinger of change. But Lena's return was not just for the railroad. She had come back with a secret, a purpose that had been years in the making. She was on a quest for answers, a search for the man who had saved her, and a reckoning with the family that had tried to destroy her. The town of Black Creek, once a place of memories, was now a minefield of old ghosts. The O'Connells, though older, were still a powerful force in the area, their influence spreading like a poison. The first challenge came in the form of a veiled threat from the O'Connells. They approached Lina, a smug look on their faces, warning her to stay out of their business and to forget about the past. Lena, however, was not the scared little girl she had once been. She met their threats with a calm defiance, a steely resolve that only infuriated them further. Jeremy, watching from a distance, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He knew she was in danger. He saw the way the O'Connells looked at her, the way their eyes held a cold, malevolent hatred. He felt the familiar protective instinct rise within him, but he also felt a deep-seated fear. He had risked his life for her once. Was he prepared to do it again? He had to make a choice, reveal himself and risk his peaceful existence, or stay hidden and let her face her enemies alone. The past had returned, and it was a more dangerous and complex threat than he could have ever imagined. The pivotal moment, the true turning point in the story, came not from a physical confrontation, but from a quiet, emotional one. Lena, with a determination that had been years in the making, tracked Jace down to his remote cabin. She stood on his porch, a woman of grace and power, and he, a man who had tried to erase her from his memory, found himself face to face with the ghost of his past. "You're Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're all grown up." "My name is Lena," she corrected, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and a quiet, unresolved hurt. "And I'm here because of you." Jace's hard exterior began to crumble. He had never expected to see her again. He had convinced himself that she was happy, safe, and that his part in her story was a small footnote. But her presence was a loud, undeniable chapter, a story he had to finally face. The emotional gut punch came when she revealed the truth of her return. The railroad project, the architecture, all of it was a front. She had returned to Black Creek to face the O'Connells, but her true purpose was something much more profound. "They didn't just want to sell me," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "They had a secret they were willing to kill for." She explained that her mother, a woman who had been a gifted artist, had created a series of valuable paintings before her death. The O'Connells had stolen them, planning to sell them for a fortune. Lena's family had tried to stop them, and in doing so, they had been murdered. Lena had been a witness, a small, terrified child who had seen a brutal truth. The O'Connells weren't just ruthless, they were murderers. They had been trying to sell her not just for money, but to silence the only witness to their crime. The revelation hit Jace with the force of a train. He had thought he was saving a child from a bad family. In reality, he had been saving her from a family of killers. His emotional reaction was immediate and powerful. His past feelings of quiet emptiness were replaced by a burning, protective rage. He had not only saved her life, but he had also unknowingly protected a piece of evidence, a truth that had been buried for years. This unexpected twist changed his entire perspective. His detached, solitary life now felt like an act of cowardice. He had run from the world, but the world had come back to find him. His moral dilemma was no longer about whether to get involved, but about how to get involved. He was no longer just a cowboy on a ranch. He was a man who had to confront the demons of his past. The silence he had so carefully cultivated was now filled with the weight of a painful truth, a truth that demanded to be told. The consequences of Lena's revelation were swift and dangerous. The O'Connells, realizing that she knew the truth about the paintings and their crimes, escalated their threats. They weren't just veiled warnings anymore. They were direct, malevolent acts designed to intimidate and terrify. The tension and suspense grew with each passing day. Jace and Lena, now a reluctant team, found themselves in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The O'Connells began to sabotage Jace's ranch. Fences were cut, cattle were spooked, and his supplies were tampered with. It was a clear message. You can't run and you can't hide. Jace, a man who lived by his wits and his knowledge of the land, found himself constantly on high alert. His internal struggle was a battle between his natural desire for self-preservation and a profound, protective love for Lena. He had always been a lone wolf, but now his fate was inextricably linked with hers. Lena's external struggle was equally challenging. The town, once filled with whispers and gossip, was now divided. Some people, loyal to the O'Connells, turned against her. Others, sensing a deeper truth, watched from the shadows, a quiet support that gave her the courage to continue. Her internal conflict was a fight against the fear that had defined her childhood. For years, she had been running, and now she was finally facing her demons head-on. But the memories of the night her family was killed were a constant torment, a dark shadow that haunted her every step. Their motivations deepened. Lena was no longer just fighting for justice. She was fighting for peace. She needed to expose the O'Connells to finally lay her family's ghost to rest. Jace, on the other hand, was not just protecting her. He was seeking redemption. He felt a profound guilt for sending her away, for not knowing the full extent of the danger she was in. This was his chance to make things right, to prove to himself that his initial act of kindness wasn't a fluke, but a part of his very being. The suspense built as they searched for the paintings, the physical proof of the O'Connells' crimes. Lena, using her architectural skills, had a hunch about their location. She believed they were hidden somewhere within the old, abandoned mine on the outskirts of town, a place filled with treacherous tunnels and deadly traps. The internal and external struggles converged in that place. Jace and Lena had to work together, trusting each other completely, to navigate a place that was both a physical and emotional labyrinth. The hunt was on, and they knew the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. The climax of the story arrived with a storm, both literal and metaphorical. A fierce blizzard swept through the canyon, trapping Jace and Lena inside the treacherous, abandoned mine. The O'Connells, having tracked them, followed them inside, their voices echoing with a cold, malevolent triumph. This was the moment of reckoning, a final, deadly confrontation in a place that held the secret to a family's murder. The atmosphere was intense, charged with a raw, primal fear. Jace and Lena, now a well-oiled team, navigated the dark tunnels, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were no longer a cowboy and a woman. They were two souls fighting for survival and for a justice that had been denied for 15 years. The defining moment came when they found it, a hidden cavern filled with crates. Inside, wrapped in old canvas, were the paintings. The O'Connells, led by their patriarch, came upon them, their faces a mask of fury. "It's over," the old man sneered, a gun raised. "You should have stayed away, little girl." The tension was at its peak. Jace, with a look of quiet resolve, stood in front of Lena. "This is not her fight," he said, his voice as steady as the mountain itself. "This is mine." The climax was a blur of motion. A struggle, a shot fired, and a blinding light from a collapsing tunnel. It seemed that all was lost. The tunnel had been booby-trapped, and the explosion had separated them from the O'Connells, trapping them in the cavern. But in the midst of the chaos, a surprising event changed everything. A small hidden passage, a remnant of an old mining shaft, was revealed by the collapse. Lena, with a surge of newfound courage, grabbed Jace's hand. "This way. My family's last stand won't be in a cage." She had a plan, a final desperate act that was a testament to her courage and her love for the man who had saved her. They crawled through the passage, leaving the O'Connells to the mercy of the collapsing mine. They had escaped, not by fighting, but by a final, desperate act of survival. The story had come full circle. Jace had saved her, and now she had returned the favor. The climax was not a moment of violence, but of escape, and in that escape, a powerful emotional bond was forged. The journey back to the surface was long and arduous. When they finally emerged, covered in dust and grime, they were no longer the same people who had entered the mine. The blizzard had passed, and the sun was rising, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. They had survived, and the truth they carried with them was more powerful than any weapon. The O'Connells, trapped in the mine, were later found, their crimes exposed, and their reign of terror finally over. But for Jace and Lena, the resolution was not about justice. It was about healing. Lena finally laid her ghost to rest. The fear that had haunted her for so long was replaced by a profound sense of peace. She had returned to Black Creek seeking justice, but she had found something more: a home. The resolution for Jace was equally profound. He was no longer a lone cowboy hiding from the world. He had found his purpose, his reason for being. He had saved a life, and in doing so, he had saved his own. He looked at Lena, at the woman she had become, and he felt a depth of love he had never known was possible. The story concluded not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, powerful moment between them. Lena decided to stay in Black Creek, to use her skills to build a new life, to build a new town from the ashes of the old. She didn't want to leave, not anymore. And Jace, a man who had been a lone wolf for so long, found a new reason to live. His life was no longer about solitude, but about companionship. The final scene was a simple one. They were standing on a hill overlooking the town, a new life beginning to take shape. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a small, unspoken promise. He had protected a girl in danger, and 15 years later, she had returned to change his fate. The story didn't end with a happily ever after, but with a beginning. The final message was clear. Some promises are worth waiting for, and some acts of kindness can change a person's fate in ways you could never have imagined.